Measuring angles. So first let's talk about what an angle is. An angle consists of two different rays that have the same initial point. So we talked about rays, how they start at one point and they go forever through another point. So there's one of our rays, AB, and then our other ray, AC. They have the same initial point, A, and this initial point is actually called a vertex when we talk about the angle. And then the two rays, those are called the sides. Now we have three different ways that we can name these angles. First, by three capital letters with the vertex in the middle. So we can go BAC, and then the other way, angle CAB. We can also name an angle by the number placed inside the angle. So see this number 1 right inside that angle, right near the vertex. So we can call this angle 1. Now the third way we can name an angle is by the vertex, but this only works if there's one angle at that vertex. So here, since we only have one angle at vertex A, we can also label this angle A. Now don't forget this angle symbol, it's really important that you put that there. Otherwise, if you just have the letter A, you could be talking about a point, just a number, or just several points. So make sure you put that angle symbol and remember the three different ways that we can name angles. Now the protractor postulate, this just talks about how to measure angles using a protractor. Most of you have probably seen this before. I'm going to show you the two different ways that you can do this. One of them is, see this cross right there, you're going to line that up with the vertex and line up this line down here with one of the sides of the angle. Then see where it lands on 0, you're going to use that outside number, outside set, and follow it all the way until you reach the other side of the angle. So this one would be 130 degrees. Now the other way that we can use a protractor is still line it up at that vertex, but you don't have to line up these lines with either of the sides of the angles. Then what you want to do is you just want to either use the outside set of numbers or the inside set. It doesn't matter, you just have to stay consistent. Take the two numbers, so if we use the outside set, we have 100 and 150. And you want to take the absolute value of the difference. 100 minus 150, which is going to give us negative 50, and the absolute value is 50. So that angle would be 50 degrees. Now we're going to get the exact same measure if you use the inside set of numbers. We have 80 and 30. So if you take the absolute value of 80 minus 30, then you end up with the absolute value of 50, which again is 50 degrees. So if you ever have to measure an angle with a protractor, this is how you would do it. Now this should be a review, but we just want to talk about some angle classification. First we have an angle whose measure is going to be greater than 0 but less than 90. We call that an acute angle. And it's going to look something like this. An angle whose measure is exactly 90 degrees is a right angle. And that'll look something like this. And especially note this box. You'll see that box there to tell you that it is a right angle. So you don't have to eyeball it. So an acute angle is going to be an angle that's anything smaller than a right angle. An angle whose measure is bigger than 90 degrees but less than 180 is called an obtuse angle. And this is an example of one obtuse angle. And an angle whose measure is exactly 180 degrees is called a straight angle. And that's actually going to be a straight line. Now we talked about the word congruent before, but we talked about it with segments. This time we're going to talk about it regarding angles. So we use that same symbol. If two angles have the same measure, then the angles are congruent angles. So this means that if the measure of angle A equals the measure of angle B, then angle A is congruent to angle B. Likewise, you can also say that if angle B is congruent to angle A, then the measure of angle B equals the measure of angle A. So let's look at the diagram below. Here we have angle A is measured 48 degrees. Angle B is measured 48 degrees. So the measure of angle A equals the measure of angle B. Now over here, we have this angle that's marked with one arc marking. And we have this angle B that's also marked with one arc marking. Now those arc markings are similar to those tick marks we talked about with segments. If each angle has one arc marking, that tells us that those two angles are congruent. Now we don't know the exact measure, but we do know that they're the same. So when we're not sure what the measure is, but we know they're the same, we say angle A is congruent to angle B. And again, note the difference of when you use an equal sign to represent exact measurements versus the congruent symbol just to talk about the actual geometric figure themselves. Now let's talk about the angle addition postulate. This is very similar in idea to the segment addition postulate we discussed earlier. It says if point P is in the interior of angle RST, so here we have angle RST, and then point P is inside of it, then it says the measure of angle RSP, which I've marked with 3 red arc markings, plus the measure of angle PST, which I've marked with 2 blue arc markings, that equals the measure of angle RST, which I've marked with 1 green arc marking. So I used different arc markings 1, 2, and 3 to show you that none of them are necessarily the same, because we talked on the page before about how to mark congruent angles. So let's look at this and we'll break it down the same way we did segment addition. You have this big angle, RST. Now you have this ray that cuts that angle into 2 different angles. You have this smaller angle and then this other angle up here. Now, if you take the measures of the 2 smaller angles and add them together, that'll give you the measure of the whole angle. So I need you to understand the idea of that, okay? So let's go ahead and take it into action, and then we're just going to work out this first example problem together. So C is a point in the interior of angle AOD. First, we need to draw a sketch. So let's start off with angle AOD. And it says that point C is in the inside. So we'll just put C somewhere inside, and then of course we want to draw that ray. This says that the measure of angle AOC is 25 degrees. So I'm going to write 25 degrees inside there. AOD. Now be careful with this one. AOD refers to the whole angle, the big one. That one is going to be 70 degrees. I'm just going to write that on the outside. So this is where colors come in handy, because it's going to help you when you're marking your diagrams, so you know exactly what measurements you're talking about. So now the question asks us to find the measure of angle COD. So we know that the 2 smaller ones together make the bigger one. We have the bigger one and one of the smaller ones. So instead of adding the angles, we can actually use subtraction to find the answer. So we have the big angle, and if we subtract one of the smaller ones, we should end up with the other one, which is the measure of angle COD. So 70 minus 25, that's going to give us 45 degrees equals the measure of angle COD. So our answer here is going to be 45 degrees. Now, I want you to go ahead and pause. Try this second example. It is a little more complicated because we have expressions instead of numbers, but I know that you can work it out. So follow this example, work this out, and I want you to find the value of x, the measure of angle AOC, and the measure of angle COD. When you're finished, check back with me and see if you got the right answer. So hopefully you set your diagram up like this, and you have angle AOC and COD, so you actually add those angles and set them equal to the whole angle, which is 61. When you do your algebra correctly, you should find that x equals 7, and then when you substitute that back in to each of the angles you need to find the measure of, you should find that the measure of angle AOC is 28 degrees and the measure of angle COD is 33 degrees. Now to double check your answer, you make sure that the measure of angle AOC plus COD equals the measure of angle AOD. So 28 plus 33 does equal 61, so we did it correctly. Now remember that whenever you're giving your answer for an angle measure, don't forget this degree symbol. It is very important to let me know that that is an angle measure for your answer. That's it for today. So remember, if you have any questions, submit your questions in the form on the website, and then we'll talk about it next class.